yeah, got Alan back. Saw Jen and Nev in our garden.
Lush.
So
Humans.
I'm enjoying the getting to do some 3D hanging out, even if we still can't hug people yet, which feels so weird. Like, our friend Lizzie came around as well a different day and like distance, but we're much less huggy. Like, she's not really a cuddle person anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But meeting them and not giving them a hug was really strange.
Yeah.
Like maybe the first time that's ever happened, including the first time I ever met them, you know?
Yeah. Definitely.
It was good.
That's lovely. Yeah, it was kind of when I like my FaceTime that I had the other week, seeing Riss and Rose like in real life for the first time, and kind of going like like I don't really know how to kind of begin and end this interaction, if not with a hug. Like,
I feel like my Cox, like you both do a self hug, feels like a good thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is a very nice thing.
Oh,
hi everybody.
Abby.
Anders, hi Anders, hey Andrada. Just flicking through the gallery view. Hey Gordon, hi Sweet Pea. Who else?
Frankie, I've already told 3 of my friends to watch your video of the snail. I just love it so much.
I'm literally so sorry to understand, but hang on.
Sorry.
Such a good hype man.
Hype's not needed, it's just amazing. Yeah.
I'm really excited for Jonas watching it. I think he'll love it.
I know he will.
Well, I think I've got all of my like charming whimsy out of my system now.
Wait, what? No.
It's all gone. No, it's all gone.
Bullshit.
Like,
Bullshit.
I got the end of the tube of charming whimsy, and I squeezed right the way down from the end, and then I kind of rolled from the end of the tube down to
That's
really
a very charming description.
And then you
there's always a little bit more left in the tube than you think there's going to be. And then you start relying on that and you don't get another, and that's when the tube runs out.
I think you have another 5 tubes in the drawer.
I believe it.
But you don't need the tubes anymore.
Well, like 5 tubs.
Maybe the real tubes were the friends we made along the way.
You're all about the tubes.
There's a thin trickle of creative juices from the whimsy spigot.
I hate that thing you just said. No, that phrase you just said. I hate it. Thanks, I hated it. Oh, blah, blah, blah. Ooh, Tabby, what are you eating? I want an ice lolly.
Yeah.
Hi, Ian.
Ice lolly from a flatmate.
Oh, very nice. That is a good flatmate.
Mm-hmm.
Strong. Hey, Lisa. Hi, Sarah. Is it Sarah or Sarah?
We have a treat.
Oh.
Ooh.
Lovely. How are we doing for time, les enfants?
It's story time.
Storytime.
Story
And
time.
I request a reminder of what happened on Friday because I forgot.
It's 11 minutes past.
Oh my God. Okay, right. Very quick reminder. Matilda is great. Her parents are terrible. Miss Honey is great. Matilda is now at school and is all, yeah, I can do maths and what? And Miss Honey's all, so
there's a scary head teacher who we haven't met yet.
Oh, I'd love to read your revision notes, Frankie.
Yeah, I didn't get that job with Spark Notes that I applied for, bafflingly. Yes, so they've at that moment the bell in the corridor sounded for the end of class. Was the last sentence that we had.
Uh-huh.
So let's get everybody muted. Now, story time. Are you sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. The Trunchbull. In the interval, Miss Honey left the classroom and headed straight for the headmistress's study. She felt wildly excited. She had just met a small girl who possessed, or so it seemed to her, quite extraordinary qualities of brilliance. There had not been time yet to find out exactly how brilliant the child was, but Miss Honey had learnt enough to realise that something had to be done about it as soon as possible. It would be ridiculous to leave a child like that stuck in the bottom form. Normally, Miss Honey was terrified of the headmistress and kept well away from her, but at this moment she felt ready to take on anybody. She knocked on the door of the dreaded private study. "Enter!" boomed the deep and dangerous voice of Miss Trunchbull. Miss Honey went in. Now, most head teachers are chosen because they possess a number of fine qualities. They understand children and have the children's best interests at heart. They are sympathetic, they are fair, and they are deeply interested in education. Miss Trunchbull possessed none of these qualities, and how she ever got her present job was a mystery. She was, above all, a most formidable female. She had once been a famous athlete, and even now the muscles were still clearly in evidence. You could see them in the bull neck, in the big shoulders, in the thick arms, in the sinewy wrists, and in the powerful legs. Looking at her, you got the feeling that this was someone who could bend iron bars and tear telephone directories in half. Her face, I'm afraid, was neither a thing of beauty nor a joy forever. She had an obstinate chin, a cruel mouth, and small, arrogant eyes. And as for her clothes, they were, to say the least, extremely odd. She always had on a brown cotton smock which was pinched in around the waist with a wide leather belt. The belt was fastened in front with an enormous silver buckle. The massive thighs which emerged from out of the smock were encased in a pair of extraordinary breeches, bottle green in colour and made of coarse twill. These breeches reached to just below the knees, and from there on down she sported green stockings with turn-up tops, which displayed her calf muscles to perfection. On her feet she wore flat-heeled brown brogues with leather flaps. She looked, in short, like a rather eccentric and bloodthirsty follower of the staghounds than the headmistress of a nice school for children. When Miss Honey entered the study, Miss Trunchbull was standing beside her huge desk with a look of scowling impatience on her face. "Yes, Miss Honey," she said. "What is it you want? You're looking very flushed and flustered this morning. What's the matter with you? Have those little stinkers been flicking spitballs at you?" "No, headmistress, nothing like that." "Well, what is it then? Get on with it. I'm a busy woman." As she spoke, she reached out and poured herself a glass of water from a jug that was always on her desk. "There is a little girl in my class called Matilda Wormwood," Miss Honey began. "That's the daughter of the man who owns Wormwood Motors in the village," Miss Trunchbull barked. She hardly ever spoke in a normal voice. She either barked or shouted. "An excellent person, Wormwood," she went on. "I was in there only yesterday. He sold me a car, almost new. Only done 10,000 miles. Previous owner was an old lady who took it out once a year at the most. A terrific bargain. Yes, I liked Wormwood. A real pillar of our society. He told me the daughter was a bad lot, though. He said to watch her. He said if anything bad ever happened in the school, it was certain to be his daughter who did it. I haven't met the little brat yet, but she'll know about it when I do. Her father said she's a real wart." "Oh, no, headmistress, that can't be right," Miss Honey cried. "Oh, yes, Miss Honey, it darn well is right. In fact, now I come to think of it, I'll bet it was she who put that stink bomb under my desk here first thing this morning. The place stank like a sewer. Of course it was her. I shall have her for that, you see if I don't. What's she look like? Nasty little worm, I'll be bound." I have discovered, Miss Honey, during my long career as a teacher, that a bad girl is a far more dangerous creature than a bad boy. What's more, they are much harder to squash. Squashing a bad girl is like trying to squash a blue bottle. You bang down on it and the darn thing isn't there. Nasty, dirty things little girls are. Glad I never was one.
Oh, but you must have been a little girl once, headmistress. Surely you were.
Not for long, anyway, Miss Trunchbull barked, grinning. I became a woman very quickly. She's completely off her rocker, Miss Honey told herself. She's balmy as a bedbug. Miss Honey stood resolutely before the headmistress. For once, she was not going to be browbeaten.
I must tell you, headmistress, she said, that you are completely mistaken about Matilda putting a stink bomb under your desk.
I am never mistaken, Miss Honey.
But his headmistress, the child only arrived in school this morning and came straight to the classroom.
Don't argue with me, for heaven's sake, woman. This little brute Matilda, or whatever her name is, has stink-bombed my study. There's no doubt about it. Thank you for suggesting it.
But I didn't suggest it, headmistress.
Of course you did. Now, what is it you want, Miss Honey? Why are you wasting my time?
I came to talk to you about Matilda, headmistress. I have extraordinary things to report about the child. May I please tell you what happened in class just now?
I suppose she set fire to your skirt and scorched your knickers, said Miss Trunchbull, snorting.
No, no, Miss Honey cried out. Matilda is a genius.
At the mention of this word, Miss Trunchbull's face turned purple and her whole body seemed to swell up like a bullfrog's. A genius? She shouted. What piffle is this you are talking, madam? You must be out of your mind. I have her father's word for it that the child is a gangster.
Her father is wrong, headmistress.
Don't be a twerp, Miss Honey. You have met the little beast for only half an hour, and her father has known her all her life. But Miss Honey was determined to have her say, and she now began to describe some of the amazing things Matilda had done with arithmetic. So she's learned a few tables by heart, has she? Miss Trunchbull barked. My dear woman, that doesn't make her a genius. It makes her a parrot.
But headmistress, she can read.
So can I, Miss Trunchbull snapped.
It is my opinion, Miss Honey said, that Matilda should be taken out of my form and placed immediately in the top form with the 11-year-olds.
Ha! Snorted Miss Trunchbull. So you want to get rid of her, do you? So you can't handle her. So now you want to unload her onto the wretched Miss Plimsoll in the top form, where she will cause even more chaos.
No, no, cried Miss Honey. That is not my reason at all.
Of course it is, shouted Miss Trunchbull. I can see right through your little plot, madam. And my answer is no. Matilda stays where she is, and it is up to you to see that she behaves herself.
But, headmistress, please.
Not another word, shouted Miss Trunchbull. And in any case, I have a rule in this school that all children remain in their own age groups regardless of ability. Great Scott, I'm not having a little 5-year-old brigand sitting with the senior girls and boys in the top form. Who ever heard of such a thing?
Miss Honey stood there helpless before this great red-necked giant. There was a lot more she would have liked to say, but she knew it was useless. She said softly, "Very well, then. It's up to you, headmistress."
You're darn right it's up to me, Miss Trunchbull bellowed. And don't forget, madam, that we are dealing here with a little viper who put a stink bomb under my desk.
She did not do that, headmistress.
Of course she did, Miss Trunchbull boomed. And I'll tell you what. I wish to heavens I was still allowed to use the birch and belt as I did in the good old days. I'd have roasted Matilda's bottom for her so she couldn't sit down for a month.
Miss Honey turned and walked out of the study, feeling depressed but by no means defeated.
I am going to do something about this child, she told herself. I don't know what it will be, but I shall find a way to help her in the end. The parents. When Miss Honey emerged from the headmistress's study, most of the children were outside in the playground. Her first move was to go round to the various teachers who taught the senior class and borrow from them a number of textbooks, books on algebra, geometry, French, English literature and the like. Then she sought out Matilda and called her into the classroom. There is no point, she said, in you sitting in class doing nothing while I am teaching the rest of the form the 2 times table and how to spell cat and rat and mouse. So during each lesson, I shall give you one of these textbooks to study. At the end of the lesson, you can come up to me with your questions if you have any, and I shall try to help you. How does that sound? Thank you, Miss Honey, Matilda said. That sounds fine. I am sure, Miss Honey said, that we'll be able to get you moved into a much higher form later on, but for the moment, the headmistress wishes you to stay where you are. Very well, Miss Honey, Matilda said. Thank you so much for getting these books for me. What a nice child she is, Miss Honey thought. I don't care what her father said about her. She seems very quiet and gentle to me, and not a bit stuck up in spite of her brilliance. In fact, she hardly seems aware of it. So, when the class reassembled, Matilda went to her desk and began to study a textbook on geometry which Miss Honey had given her. The teacher kept half an eye on her all the time and noticed that the child very soon became deeply absorbed in the book. She never glanced up once during the entire lesson. Miss Honey, meanwhile, was making another decision. She was deciding that she would go herself and have a secret talk with Matilda's mother and father as soon as possible. She simply refused to let the matter rest where it was. The whole thing was ridiculous. She couldn't believe that the parents were totally unaware of their daughter's remarkable talents. After all, Mr. Wormwood was a successful motor car dealer, so she presumed that he was a fairly intelligent man himself. In any event, parents never underestimated the abilities of their own children. Quite the reverse. Sometimes it was well nigh impossible for a teacher to convince the proud mother or father that their beloved offspring was a complete nitwit. Miss Honey felt confident that she would have no difficulty in convincing Mr. and Mrs. Wormwood that Matilda was something very special indeed. The trouble was going to be to stop them from getting over-enthusiastic. And now Miss Honey's hopes began to expand even further. She started wondering whether permission might not be sought from the parents for her to give private tuition to Matilda after school. The prospect of coaching a child as bright as this appealed enormously to her professional instincts as a teacher. And suddenly she decided that she would go and call on Mr. and Mrs. Wormwood that very evening. She would go fairly late, between 9 and 10 o'clock, when Matilda was sure to be in bed. And that is precisely what she did. Having got the address from the school records, Miss Honey set out to walk from her own home to the Wormwoods' house shortly after 9. She found the house in a pleasant street where each smallish building was separated from its neighbours by a bit of garden. It was a modern brick house that could not have been cheap to buy, and the name on the gate said, Cosy Nook. Nosy Cook might have been better, Miss Honey thought. She was given to playing with words in that way. She walked up the path and rang the bell, and while she stood waiting, she could hear the television blaring inside. The door was opened by a small, ratty-looking man with a thin, ratty moustache who was wearing a sports coat that had an orange and red stripe in the material. Yes, he said, peering out at Miss Honey. If you're selling raffle tickets, I don't want any. I'm not, Miss Honey said, and please forgive me for butting in on you like this. I am Matilda's teacher at school, and it is important I have a word with you and your wife. Got into trouble already, has she? Mr. Wormwood said, blocking the doorway. Well, she's your responsibility from now on. You'll have to deal with her.
She is in no trouble at all, Miss Honey said. I have come with good news about her. Quite startling news, Mr. Wormwood. Do you think I might come in for a few minutes and talk to you about Matilda? We are right in the middle of watching one of our favourite programmes, Mr. Wormwood said. This is most inconvenient. Why don't you come back some other time? Miss Honey began to lose patience. Mr. Wormwood, she said, if you think some rotten TV programme is more important than your daughter's future, then you ought not to be a parent. Why don't you switch the darn thing off and listen to me? That shook Mr. Wormwood. He was not used to being spoken to in this way. He peered carefully at the slim, frail woman who stood so resolutely on the porch. Oh, very well, he snapped. Come on in and let's get it over with. Miss Honey stepped briskly inside. Mrs. Wormwood isn't going to thank you for this, the man said, as he led her into the sitting room, where a large platinum blonde woman was gazing rapturously at the TV screen. Who is it? The woman said, not looking round. Some school teacher, Mr. Wormwood said. She said she's got to talk to us about Matilda. He crossed to the TV set and turned down the sound, but left a picture on the screen. Don't do that, Harry, Mrs. Wormwood cried out. Willard is just about to propose to Angelica. You can still watch it while we're talking, Mr. Wormwood said. This is Matilda's teacher. She says she's got some sort of news to give us. My name is Jennifer Honey, Miss Honey said. How do you do, Mrs. Wormwood? Mrs. Wormwood glared at her and said, What's the trouble then? Nobody invited Miss Honey to sit down, so she chose a chair and sat down anyway. This, she said, was your daughter's first day at school. We know that, Mrs. Wormwood said, ratty about missing her programme. Is that all you came to tell us? Miss Honey stared hard into the other woman's wet grey eyes, and she allowed the silence to hang in the air until Mrs. Wormwood became uncomfortable. Do you wish me to explain why I came? She said. Get on with it then, Mrs. Wormwood said. I'm sure you know, Miss Honey said, that children in the bottom class at school are not expected to be able to read or spell or juggle with numbers when they first arrive. 5-year-olds cannot do that. But Matilda can do it all. And if I am to believe her, I wouldn't, Mrs. Wormwood said. She was still ratty at losing the sound on the TV. Was she lying then, Miss Honey said, when she told me that nobody taught her to multiply or to read? If you teach her. Teach her what? Mr. Wormwood said. To read books, Miss Honey said. Perhaps you did teach her. Perhaps she was lying. Perhaps you have shelves full of books all over the house. I wouldn't know. Perhaps you are both great readers. Of course we read, Mr. Wormwood said. Don't be so daft. I read the autocar and the motor from cover to cover every week. This child has already read an astonishing number of books, Miss Honey said. I was simply trying to find out if she came from a family that loved good literature. We don't hold with book reading, Mr. Wormwood said. You can't make a living from sitting on your fanny and reading storybooks. We don't keep them in the house. I see, Miss Honey said. Well, all I came to tell you was that Matilda has a brilliant mind. But I expect you knew that already. Of course I knew she could read, the mother said. She spends her life up in a room buried in some silly book. But does it not intrigue you, Miss Honey said, that a little 5-year-old child is reading long adult novels by Dickens and Hemingway? Doesn't that make you jump up and down with excitement? Not particularly, the mother said. I'm not in favour of blue stocking girls. A girl should think about making herself look attractive so she can get a good husband later on. Look, than books, Miss Hunky. The name is Honey,
Miss Honey said. Now, look at me, Mrs. Wormwood said. Then look at you. You chose books. I chose looks. Miss Honey looked at the plain, plump person with the smug suet pudding face who was sitting across the room. What did you say? She said. I said you chose books and I chose looks, Mrs. Wormwood said. And who's finished up the better off? Me, of course. I'm sitting pretty in a nice house with a successful businessman and you're left slaving away teaching a lot of nasty little children the ABC. Quite right, Sugar Plum, Mr. Wormwood said, casting a look of such simpering sloppiness at his wife it would have made a cat sick. Miss Honey decided that if she was going to get anywhere with these people, she must not lose her temper. I haven't told you all of it yet, she said. Matilda, so far as I can gather at this early stage, is also a kind of mathematical genius. She can multiply complicated figures in her head like lightning. What's the point of that when you can buy a calculator? Mr. Wormwood said. A girl doesn't get a man by being brainy, Mrs. Wormwood said. Look at that film star, for instance, she added, pointing at the silent TV screen where a bosomy female was being embraced by a craggy actor in the moonlight. You don't think she got him to do that by multiplying figures at him, do you? Not likely. And now he's going to marry her. You see if he doesn't. And she's going to live in a mansion with a butler and lots of maids. Miss Honey could hardly believe what she was hearing. She had heard that parents like this existed all over the place and that their children turned out to be delinquents and dropouts, but it was still a shock to meet a pair of them in the flesh. Matilda's trouble, she said, trying once again, is that she is so far ahead of everyone else around her that it might be worth thinking about some kind of extra private tuition. I seriously believe that she could be brought up to university standard in 2 or 3 years with proper coaching. University? Mr. Wormwood shouted, bouncing up in his chair. Who wants to go to university, for heaven's sake? All I learn there is bad habits. That is not true, Miss Honey said. If you had a heart attack this minute and had to call a doctor, that doctor would be a university graduate. If you got sued for selling someone a rotten second-hand car, you'd have to get a lawyer and he'd be a university graduate too. Do not despise clever people, Mr. Wormwood. But I can see we're not going to agree. I'm sorry I burst in on you like this. Miss Honey rose from her chair and walked out of the room. Mr. Wormwood followed her to the front door and said, Good of you to come, Miss Hawkes, or is it Miss Harris? It's neither, Miss Honey said, but let it go. And away she went. Throwing the hammer. The nice thing about Matilda was that if you had met her casually and talked to her, you would have thought she was a perfectly normal 5.5-year-old child. She displayed almost no outward signs of her brilliance, and she never showed off. This is a very sensible and quiet little girl, you would have said to yourself. And unless for some reason you had just started a discussion with her about literature or mathematics, you would never have known the extent of her brain power. It was therefore easy for Matilda to make friends with other children. All those in her class liked her. They knew, of course, that she was clever because they had heard her being questioned by Miss Honey on the first day of term. And they knew also that she was allowed to sit quietly with a book during lessons and not pay attention to the teacher. But children of their age do not search deeply for reasons. They are far too wrapped up in their own small struggles to worry overmuch about what others are doing and why. Among Matilda's newfound friends was the girl called Lavender. Right from the first day of term, the two of them started wandering round together during the morning break and in the lunch hour. Lavender was exceptionally small for her age, a skinny little nymph with deep brown eyes and with dark hair that was cut in a fringe across her forehead. Matilda liked her because she was gutsy and adventurous. She liked Matilda for exactly the same reasons. Before the first week of term was up, awesome tales about the headmistress, Miss Trunchbull, began to filter through to the newcomers. Matilda and Lavender, standing in a corner of the playground during morning break on the third day, were approached by a rugged 10-year-old with a boil on her nose called Hortensia. "You scum, I suppose," Hortensia said to them, looking down from her great height. She was eating from an extra-large bag of potato crisps and digging the stuff out in handfuls. "Welcome to Borstal," she added, spraying bits of crisp out of her mouth like snowflakes. The two tiny ones, confronted by this giant, kept a watchful silence. "Have you met the Trunchbull yet?" Hortensia asked.
"We've met her at prayers," Lavender said, "but we haven't met her."
"You've got a treat coming to you," Hortensia said. "She hates very small children. She therefore loathes the bottom class and everyone in it. She thinks 5-year-olds are grubs that haven't hatched out yet." In went another fistful of crisps, and when she spoke again, out sprayed the crumbs. "If you survive your first year, you may just manage to live through the rest of your time here. But many don't survive. They get carried out on stretchers screaming. I've seen it often." Hortensia paused to observe the effect these remarks were having on the two titchy ones. Not very much. They seemed pretty cool. So the large one decided to regale them with further information. "I suppose you know the Trunchbull has a lock-up cupboard in her private quarters called the Chokey. Have you heard about the Chokey?" Matilda and Lavender shook their heads and continued to gaze up at the giant. Being very small, they were inclined to mistrust any creature that was larger than they were, especially senior girls. "The Chokey," Hortensia went on, "is a very tall but very narrow cupboard. The floor is only 10 inches square, so you can't sit down or squat in it. You have to stand. And 3 of the walls are made of cement with bits of broken glass sticking out all over, so you can't lean against them. You have to stand more or less at attention all the time when you get locked up in there. It's terrible."
"Can't you lean against the door?" Matilda asked.
"Don't be daft," Hortensia said. "The door's got thousands of sharp, spiky nails sticking out of it. They've probably been hammered through from the outside, probably by the Trunchbull herself."
"Have you ever been in there?" Lavender asked.
"My first term, I was in there 6 times, Hortensia said. "Twice for a whole day, and the other time for 2 hours each. But 2 hours is quite bad enough. It's pitch dark, and you have to stand up dead straight, and if you wobble at all, you get spiked either by the glass on the walls or by the nails on the door."
"Why were you put in?" Matilda asked. "What had you done?"
"The first time," Hortensia said, "I poured half a tin of golden syrup onto the seat of the chair the Trunchbull was going to sit on at prayers. It was wonderful. When she lowered herself into the chair, there was a loud squelching noise similar to that made by a hippopotamus when lowering its foot into the mud on the banks of the Limpopo River. But you're too small and stupid to have read the Just So stories, aren't you?"
"I've read them," Matilda said.
"You're a liar," Hortensia said amiably. "You can't even read yet. But no matter. So when the Trunchbull sat down on the golden syrup, the squelch was beautiful. And when she jumped up again, the chair sort of stuck to the seat of those awful green breeches she wears and came with her for a few seconds until the thick syrup slowly came unstuck. Then she clasped her hands to the seat of her breeches and both hands got covered in the muck. You should have heard her bellow."
"But how did she know it was you?" Lavender asked.
"A little squirt called Ollie Bogwhistle sneaked on me," Hortensia said. "I knocked his front teeth out."
"And the Trunchbull put you in the Chokey for a whole day?" Matilda asked, gulping.
"All day long," Hortensia said. "I was off my rocker when she let me out. I was babbling like an idiot."
"What were the other things you did to get put in the Chokey?" Lavender asked.
"Oh,
I can't remember them all now, Hortensia said. She spoke with the air of an old warrior who had been in so many battles that bravery has become commonplace. It's all so long ago, she added, stuffing more crisps into her mouth. Oh, yes, I can remember one. Here's what happened. I chose a time when I knew the Trunchbull was out of the way teaching the sixth formers, and I put up my hands and asked to go to the bogs. But instead of going there, I sneaked into the Trunchbull's room. And after a speedy search, I found the drawer where she kept all her gym knickers. Go on, Matilda said, spellbound. What happened next? I had sent away by post, you see, for this very powerful itching powder, Hortensia said. It cost 50 pence a packet and was called the Skin Scorcher. The label said it was made from the powdered teeth of deadly snakes and was guaranteed to raise welts the size of walnuts on your skin. So I sprinkled this stuff inside every pair of knickers in the drawer and then folded them all up again carefully. Hortensia paused to cram more crisps into her mouth. Did it work? Lavender asked. Well, Hortensia said, a few days later, during prayers, the Trunchbull suddenly started scratching herself like mad down below. Aha, I said to myself, here we go. She's changed for Jim already. It was pretty wonderful to be sitting there watching it all and knowing that I was the only person in the whole school who realised exactly what was going on inside the Trunchbull's pants. And I felt safe too. I knew I couldn't be caught. Then the scratching got worse. She couldn't stop. She must have thought she had a wasp's nest down there. And then, right in the middle of the Lord's Prayer, she leapt up and grabbed her bottom and rushed out of the room. Both Matilda and Lavender were enthralled. It was quite clear to them that they were at this moment standing in the presence of a master. Here was somebody who had brought the art of skullduggery to the highest point of perfection. Somebody, moreover, who was willing to risk life and limb in pursuit of her calling. They gazed in wonder at this goddess, and suddenly even the boil on her nose was no longer a blemish, but a badge of courage. How did he catch you that time? Lavender asked, breathless with wonder. She didn't, Hortensia said, but I got a day in a chokey just the same. Why? They both asked. The Trunchbull, Hortensia said, has a nasty habit of guessing. When she doesn't know who the culprit is, she makes a guess at it, and the trouble is, she's often right. I was the prime suspect this time because of the golden syrup daub, and although I knew she didn't have any proof, nothing I said made any difference. I kept shouting, how could I have done it, Miss Trunchbull? I didn't even know you kept any spare knickers at school. I didn't even know what itching powder is. I've never heard of it. But the lying didn't help me, in spite of the great performance I put on. The Trunchbull simply grabbed me by the ear and rushed me to the chokey at the double and threw me inside and locked the door. That was my second all-day stretch. It was absolute torture. I was spiked and cut all over when I came out. It's like a war, Matilda said, overawed. You're darn right it's like a war, Hortensia cried, and the casualties are terrific. We are the Crusaders, the gallant army fighting for our lives with hardly any weapons at all. And the Trunchbull is the Prince of Darkness, the foul serpent, the fiery dragon with all the weapons at her command. It's a tough life. We all try to support each other. You can rely on us, Lavender said, making her height of 3 feet 2 inches stretch as tall as possible. No, I can't, Hortensia said. You're only shrimps. But you never know. We may find a use for you one day in some undercover job. Tell us just a little bit more about what she does, Matilda said. Please do. I mustn't frighten you before you've been here a week, Hortensia said.
You won't, Lavender said. We may be small, but we're quite tough.
Listen to this then, Hortensia said. Only yesterday, the Trunchbull caught a boy called Julius Rotwinkle eating licorice all sorts during the scripture lesson, and she simply picked him up by one arm and flung him clear out of the open classroom window. Our classroom is one floor up, and we saw Julius Rotwinkle go sailing out over the garden like a frisbee and landing with a thump in the middle of the lettuces. Then the Trunchbull turned to us and said, "From now on, anybody caught eating in class goes straight out the window."
Did this Julius Rotwinkle break any bones? Lavender asked.
Only a few, Hortensia said. You've got to remember that the Trunchbull once threw the hammer for Britain in the Olympics, so she's very proud of her right arm.
What's throwing the hammer?
Lavender asked. The hammer, Hortensia said, is actually a very great cannonball on the end of a long bit of wire, and the thrower whisks it round and round his or her head faster and faster and then lets it go. You have to be terrifically strong. The Trunchbull will throw anything around just to keep her arm in, especially children.
Good heavens, Lavender said.
I once heard her say, Hortensia went on, that a large boy is about the same weight as an Olympic hammer, and therefore he's very useful for practicing with.
At that point, something strange happened. The playground, which up to then had been filled with shrieks and the shouting of children at play, all at once became silent as the grave.
"Watch out," Hortensia whispered.
Matilda and Lavender glanced round and saw the gigantic figure of Miss Trunchbull advancing through the crowd of boys and girls with menacing strides. The children drew back hastily to let her through, and her progress across the asphalt was like that of Moses going through the Red Sea when the waters parted. A formidable figure she was too, in her belted smock and green breeches. Below the knees, her calf muscles stood out like grapefruits inside her stockings.
"Amanda Thrip," she was shouting. "You, Amanda Thrip, come here." "Hold your hat," Hortensia whispered.
"What's going to happen?"
Lavender whispered back. "That idiot Amanda," Hortensia said, "has let her long hair grow even longer during the halls, and her mother has plaited it into pigtails. Silly thing to do."
"Why silly?"
Matilda asked. "If there's one thing the Trunchbull can't stand, it's pigtails," Hortensia said.
Matilda and Lavender saw the giant in green breeches advancing upon a girl of about 10 who had a pair of plaited golden pigtails hanging over her shoulders. Each pigtail had a blue satin bow at the end of it, and it all looked very pretty. The girl wearing the pigtails, Amanda Thrip, stood quite still, watching the advancing giant, and the expression on her face was one that you might find on the face of a person who is trapped in a small field with an enraged bull, which is charging flat out towards her. The girl was glued to the spot, terror-struck, pop-eyed, quivering, knowing for certain that the day of judgment had come for her at last. Miss Trunchbull had now reached the victim and stood towering over her.
"I want those filthy pigtails off before you come back to school tomorrow," she barked. "Chop them off and throw them in the dustbin, you understand?"
Amanda, paralysed with fright, managed to stutter. "My mummy likes them. She plaits them for me every morning."
"Your mummy's a twit," the Trunchbull bellowed. She pointed a finger the size of a salami at the child's head and shouted, "You look like a rat with a tail coming out of its head."
"My mummy thinks I look lovely, Miss Trunchbull," Amanda stuttered, shaking like a blancmange.
"I don't give a tinker's toot what your mummy thinks," the Trunchbull yelled, and with that she lunged forward.
With that, she lunged forward and grabbed hold of Amanda's pigtails in her right fist and lifted the girl clear off the ground. Then she started swinging her round and round her head, faster and faster, and Amanda was screaming blue murder, and the Trunchbull was yelling, "I'll give you pigtails, you little rat!" "Shades of the Olympics," Hortensia murmured. "She's getting up speed now, just like she does with the hammer. 10 to 1 she's going to throw her." And now the Trunchbull was leaning back against the weight of the whirling girl and pivoting expertly on her toes, spinning round and round. And soon Amanda Thripp was travelling so fast she became a blur. And suddenly, with a mighty grunt, the Trunchbull let go of the pigtails, and Amanda went sailing like a rocket right over the wire fence of the playground and high up into the sky. "Well thrown, sir," someone shouted from across the playground, and Matilda, who was mesmerised by the whole crazy affair, saw Amanda Thripp descending in a long, graceful parabola onto the playing field beyond. She landed on the grass and bounced 3 times and finally came to rest. Then, amazingly, she sat up. She looked a trifle dazed, and who could blame her? But after a minute or so, she was on her feet again and tottering back towards the playground. The Trunchbull stood in the playground, dusting off her hands. "Not bad," she said, "considering I'm not in strict training. Not bad at all." Then she strode away. "She's mad," Hortensia said. "But the parents complain?" Matilda asked. "Would yours?" Hortensia asked. "I know mine wouldn't. She treats the mothers and fathers just the same as the children, and they're all scared to death of her. I'll be seeing you sometime, you two." And with that, she sauntered away. How are we doing for time?
Nearly 10.
Nearly 10. Ooh.
There are 6 minutes.
You can do it, Frankie.
Yeah, this one's really quick.
What do people reckon? Do they want another chapter?
Or
if it's 6 minutes.
More.
And I have to go at 10, but then it's only 1 chapter to catch up on.
More.
Okay. Oh, and it's a good one. Bruce Bogtrotter and the Cake.
"How can she get away with it?" Lavender said to Matilda. "Surely the children go home and tell their mothers and fathers. I know my father would raise a terrific stink if I told him the headmistress had grabbed me by the hair and slung me over the playground fence." "No, he wouldn't," Matilda said, "and I'll tell you why. He simply wouldn't believe you." "Of course he would." "He wouldn't," Matilda said, "and the reason is obvious. Your story would sound too ridiculous to be believed, and that is the Trunchbull's great secret." "What is?" Lavender asked. Matilda said, "Never do anything by halves if you want to get away with it. Be outrageous. Go the whole hog. Make sure everything you do is so completely crazy it's unbelievable. No parent is going to believe this pigtail story, not in a million years. Mine wouldn't. They'd call me a liar." "In that case," Lavender said, "Amanda's mother isn't going to cut her pigtails off." "No, she isn't," Matilda said. "Amanda will do it herself. You see if she does it." "Do you think she's mad?" Lavender asked. "Who?" "The Trunchbull." "No, I don't think she's mad," Matilda said, "but she's very dangerous. Being in this school is like being in a cage with a cobra. You have to be very fast on your feet." They got another example of how dangerous the headmistress could be on the very next day.
During lunch, an announcement was made that the whole school should go into the assembly hall and be seated as soon as the meal was over. When all the 250 or so boys and girls were settled down in assembly, the Trunchbull marched onto the platform. None of the other teachers came in with her. She was carrying a riding crop in her right hand. She stood up there on centre stage in her green breeches with legs apart and riding crop in hand, glaring at the sea of upturned faces before her. "What's going to happen?" Lavender whispered. "I don't know," Matilda whispered back. The whole school waited for what was coming next. "Bruce Bogtrotter!" the Trunchbull barked suddenly. "Where is Bruce Bogtrotter?" Hands shot up among the seated children. "Come up here," the Trunchbull shouted, "and look smart about it." An 11-year-old boy who was decidedly large and round stood up and waddled briskly forward. He climbed up onto the platform. "Stand over there," the Trunchbull ordered, pointing. The boy stood to one side. He looked nervous. He knew very well he wasn't up there to be presented with a prize. He was watching the headmistress with an exceedingly wary eye, and he kept edging farther and farther away from her with little shuffles of his feet, rather as a rat might edge away from a terrier that is watching it from across the room. His plump, flabby face had turned grey with fearful apprehension. His stockings hung about his ankles. "This clot," boomed the headmistress, pointing her riding crop at him like a rapier. "This blackhead, this foul carbuncle, this poisonous pustule that you see before you is none other than a disgusting criminal, a denizen of the underworld, a member of the mafia." "Who, me?" Bruce Bogtrotter said, looking genuinely puzzled. "A thief!" the Trunchbull screamed. "A crook! A pirate! A brigand! A rustler!" "Steady on," the boy said. "I mean, dash it all, headmistress." "Do you deny it, you miserable little gumboil? Do you plead not guilty?" "I don't know what you're talking about," the boy said, more puzzled than ever. "I'll tell you what I'm talking about, you suppurating little blister," the Trunchbull shouted. "Yesterday morning, during break, you sneaked like a serpent into the kitchen and stole a slice of my private chocolate cake from my tea tray. That tray had just been prepared for me personally by the cook. It was my morning snack. And as for the cake, it was my own private stock. That was not boys' cake. You don't think for 1 minute I'm going to eat the filth I give to you. That cake was made from real butter and real cream. And he, that robber bandit, that safecracker, that highwayman standing over there with his socks around his ankles, stole it and ate it." "I never did," the boy exclaimed, turning from grey to white. "Don't lie to me, Bogtrotter," barked the Trunchbull. "The cook saw you, and what's more, she saw you eating it." The Trunchbull paused to wipe a fleck of froth from her lips. When she spoke again, her voice was suddenly softer, quieter, more friendly, and she leaned towards the boy, smiling. "You like my special chocolate cake, don't you, Bogtrotter? It's rich and delicious, isn't it, Bogtrotter?" "Very good," the boy mumbled. The words were out before he could stop himself. "You're right," the Trunchbull said. "It is very good. Therefore, I think you should congratulate the cook. When a gentleman has had a particularly good meal, Bogtrotter, he always sends his compliments to the chef. You didn't know that, did you, Bogtrotter? But those who inhabit the criminal underworld are not noted for their good manners." The boy remained silent. "Cook!" the Trunchbull shouted, turning her head towards the door. "Come here, cook. Bogtrotter wishes to tell you how good your chocolate cake is." The cook, a tall, shriveled female who looked as though all of her body juices had been dried out of her long ago in a hot oven, walked onto the platform wearing a dirty white apron. Her entrance had clearly been arranged beforehand by the headmistress. "Now then, Bogtrotter," the Trunchbull boomed, "tell cook what you think of her chocolate cake." "Very good," the boy mumbled. You could see he was now beginning to wonder what all of this was leading up to. The only thing he knew for certain was that the law forbade the Trunchbull to hit him with the riding crop that she kept smacking against her thigh. That was some comfort, but not much, because the Trunchbull was totally unpredictable. One never knew what she was going to do next. "There you are, cook," the Trunchbull cried. "Bogtrotter likes your cake. He adores your cake. Do you have any more of your cake that you could give him?" "I do indeed," the cook said. She seemed to have learnt her lines by heart. "Then go and get it, and bring a knife to cut it with." The cook disappeared. Almost at once she was back again, staggering under the weight of an enormous round chocolate cake on a china platter. The cake was fully 18 inches in diameter, and it was covered with dark brown chocolate icing. "Put it on the table," the Trunchbull said. There was a small table centre stage with a chair behind it. The cook placed the cake carefully on the table. "Sit down, Bogtrotter," the Trunchbull said. "Sit there." The boy moved cautiously to the table and sat down. He stared at the gigantic cake. "There you are, Bogtrotter," the Trunchbull said, and once again her voice became soft, persuasive, even gentle. "It's all for you, every bit of it. As you enjoyed that slice you had yesterday so very much, I ordered cook to bake you an extra large one, all for yourself." "Well, thank you," the boy said, totally bemused. "Thank cook, not me," the Trunchbull said. "Thank you, cook," the boy said. The cook stood there like a shriveled bootlace, tight-lipped, implacable, disapproving. She looked as though her mouth was full of lemon juice. "Come on then," the Trunchbull said. "Why don't you cut yourself a nice thick slice and try it?" "What now?" the boy said, cautious. He knew there was a catch in this somewhere, but he wasn't sure where. "Can't I take it home instead?" he asked. "That would be impolite," the Trunchbull said with a crafty grin. "You must show Cookie here how grateful you are for all the trouble she's taken." The boy didn't move. "Go on, get on with it," the Trunchbull said. "Cut a slice and taste it. We haven't got all day." The boy picked up the knife and was about to cut into the cake when he stopped. He stared at the cake. Then he looked up at the Trunchbull, then at the tall, stringy cook with her lemon juice mouth. All the children in the hall were waiting tensely, waiting for something to happen. They felt certain it must. The Trunchbull was not a person who would give someone a whole chocolate cake to eat just out of kindness. Many were guessing that it had been filled with pepper or castor oil or some other foul-tasting substance that would make the boy violently sick. It might even be arsenic, and he would be dead in 10 seconds flat. Or perhaps it was a booby-trapped cake, and the whole thing would blow up the moment it was cut, taking Bruce Bogtrotter with it. No one in the school put it past the Trunchbull to do any of these things. "I don't want to eat it," the boy said. "Taste it, you little brat," the Trunchbull said. "You're insulting the cook." Very gingerly, the boy began to cut a thin slice of the vast cake. Then he levered the slice out. Then he put down the knife and took the sticky thing in his fingers and started very slowly to eat it. "It's good, isn't it?" the Trunchbull asked. "Very good," the boy said, chewing and swallowing. He finished the slice. "Have another," the Trunchbull said. "That's enough, thank you," the boy murmured. I said, have another, the Trunchbull said, and now there was an altogether sharper edge to her voice. Eat another slice. Do as you are told. I don't want another slice, the boy said. Suddenly, the Trunchbull exploded. Eat, she shouted, banging her thigh with a riding crop. If I tell you to eat, you will eat. You wanted cake. You stole cake, and now you've got cake. What's more, you're going to eat it. You do not leave this platform, and nobody leaves this hall until you have eaten the entire cake that is sitting there in front of you. Do I make myself clear, Bogtrotter? Do you get my meaning? The boy looked at the Trunchbull. Then he looked down at the enormous cake. Eat! 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 The Trunchbull was yelling. Very slowly, the boy cut himself another slice and began to eat it. Matilda was fascinated. Do you think he can do it? She whispered to Lavender. No, Lavender whispered back. It's impossible. He'd be thick before he was halfway through. The boy kept going. When he had finished the second slice, he looked at the Trunchbull, hesitating. Eat, she shouted. Greedy little thieves who like to eat cake must have cake. Eat faster, boy, eat faster. We don't want to be here all day. And don't stop like you're doing now. Next time you stop before it's all finished, you'll go straight into the chokey and I shall lock the door and throw the key down the well. The boy cut a third slice and started to eat it. He finished this one quicker than the other two, and when that was done, he immediately picked up the knife and cut the next slice. In some peculiar way, he seemed to be getting into his stride. Matilda, watching closely, saw no signs of distress in the boy yet. If anything, he seemed to be gathering confidence as he went along. He's doing well, she whispered to Lavender. He'll be thick soon, Lavender whispered back. It's going to be horrid. When Bruce Bogtrotter had eaten his way through half of the entire enormous cake, he paused for just a couple of seconds and took several deep breaths. The Trunchbull stood with hands on hips, glaring at him. Get on with it, she shouted. Eat it up. Suddenly, the boy let out a gigantic belch which rolled around the assembly hall like thunder. Many of the audience began to giggle. Silence, shouted the Trunchbull. The boy cut himself another thick slice and started eating it fast. There were still no signs of flagging or giving up. He certainly did not look as though he was about to stop and cry out, I can't eat any more, I'm going to be sick. He was still in the running. And now a subtle change was coming over the 250 watching children in the audience. Earlier on, they had sensed impending disaster. They had prepared themselves for an unpleasant scene in which the wretched boy, stuffed to the gills with chocolate cake, would have to surrender and beg for mercy, and then they would have watched the triumphant Trunchbull forcing more and still more cake into the mouth of the gasping boy. Not a bit of it. Bruce Bogtrotter was 3/4 of the way through and still going strong. One sensed that he was almost beginning to enjoy himself. He had a mountain to climb, and he was jolly well going to reach the top or die in the attempt. What is more, he had now become very conscious of his audience and that how they were all silently rooting for him. This was nothing less than a battle between him and the mighty Trunchbull. Suddenly someone shouted, Come on, Brucey, you can make it! The Trunchbull wheeled round and yelled, Silence! The audience watched intently. They were thoroughly caught up in the contest. They were longing to start cheering, but they didn't dare. I think he's going to make it, Matilda whispered. I think so too, Lavender whispered back. I wouldn't have believed anyone in the world could eat the whole of a cake that size. The Trunchbull doesn't believe it either, Matilda whispered. Look at her. She's turning redder and redder. She's going to kill him if he wins. The boy was slowing down now. There was no doubt about that. But he kept pushing the stuff into his mouth with the dogged perseverance of a long-distance runner who has sighted the finishing line and knows he must keep going. As the very last mouthful disappeared, a tremendous cheer rose up from the audience, and children were leaping onto their chairs and yelling and clapping and shouting, "Well done, Brucey! Good for you, Brucey! You've won a gold medal, Brucey!" The Trunchbull stood motionless on the platform. Her great horsey face had turned the colour of molten lava, and her eyes were glittering with fury. She glared at Bruce Bogtrotter, who was sitting on his chair like some huge, overstuffed grub, replete, comatose, unable to move or to speak. A fine sweat was beading his forehead, but there was a grin of triumph on his face. Suddenly, the Trunchbull lunged forward and grabbed the large, empty china platter on which the cake had rested. She raised it high in the air and brought it down with a crash right on the top of the wretched Bruce Bogtrotter's head, and pieces flew all over the platform. The boy was by now so full of cake he was like a sack full of wet cement, and you couldn't have hurt him with a sledgehammer. He simply shook his head a few times and went on grinning. "Go to blazes!" screamed the Trunchbull, and she marched off the platform, followed closely by the cook.
I forgot how much I love that part.
Yay.
Your Hortense had me absolutely cracking up, like full on laughing, just going crazy. Oh my God. Oh, I'm going to have to use one of those apps to download this from YouTube so it never goes away.
Nick will make it into an audiobook like he has for all of them.
Yes.
Yeah. So is this hangout open to literary criticism, or is it just like positive vibes feel good?
Of course, go for it.
I'm not, like, we've been thinking, like, I don't know.
We've been making a list of the different kinds of people that Roald Dahl hates.
But like, it's curious. I don't know. There's a strange paradox seemingly going on of like that like a woman's worth should not be defined by her attractiveness, but at the same time all the characters that he writes who are, you know, like good women are the attractive ones, and makes a point of how ugly the various like people he disapproves of are. I don't know. Also, like, it's a weird thing where, like, it seems to pass the Bechdel test technically because it's lots of women hating each other.
It's the existential paradox of you have to be beautiful, but you can't care about looks. It's like,
Yes, this is a very dude sentiment.
Everyday bullshit.
I mean, in The Witches, he has a whole bit about like how women are, or how people are beautiful if they think beautiful thoughts, and it doesn't matter if they, you know, they have a wonky nose and a wonky chin and they're chubby, they're still beautiful.
Right, but he seems very fixated on the various wonky chins.
Yeah, and the size of the different characters. The female characters, obviously not all of them are.
Yeah, he said that about the twits as well, that if you have bad thoughts, then you're going to look ugly no matter how beautiful you are, and that just feels like a just world fallacy.
Yeah, like that's there in the text, but the subtext is still very clearly, oh, you can just tell she's a wrong one. Like, yeah, I don't know.
And that Matilda is continuously really nice and modest about her brilliance. Even though she's like a really smart and plays tricks and all that, she's perceived as being lovely and nice and quiet, and I don't like that.
Yeah, I think Miss Honey also has a bit of that vibe too. I mean, obviously all the children instantly fall with her, and that's her whole character, but like, she goes and she tries to be smart and make the smart move, but she doesn't do the big, bold, like, standing up for herself thing. She just kind of sits there and is like, all right, how do I play this smartly? As, like, women usually do in situations. when shit's getting to do, like, no.
Well, she does stand up to the parents, no?
A little.
She does get a little bit like aggressive, being like, "You're not a good parent."
That's true, but on Matilda's behalf, not her own.
Yeah, that's true. It's always easier to stand up for other people than for yourself, though.
Very true.
I love Storytime Book Club. I love hearing everyone's thoughts and like having some kind of proper discussion about all of the books. And yeah, like Roald Dahl made kind of a monster. Kind of a monster, not a great dude.
I mean, he wasn't a nice person in any way, shape, or form, I don't think.
I mean, also, like, the thing that people, like, kids love about Roald Dahl, and, like, such a element of them, is the grotesqueness of it all. Like, everything's grotesque. Like, even the nice characters are kind of so nice that it's like...
So can somebody explain to me what the deal is with, like, Roald Dahl being a bad person? I don't think I've heard any of this.
I don't know anything about him, to be honest.
I think he was yeah, like I'm not super informed about it, but I think that he was had some
a man
problematic
He was like really emotionally distant from his own kids, right?
And anti-Semitic, I think.
Yeah, there's accusations of that.
Yeah, I don't know that much about it.
Wasn't there some suggestions that he was abusive to his wife as well?
Oh shit, man!
Never heard that.
Wow, there's an entire BBC article called "The Dark Side of Roald Dahl."
Oh wow!
Fucking hell!
Great.
Maybe I'm making that up. I might be making that up, but I had it in the back of my head that there was rumors about that.
Man.
Oh, the book's not as old as I thought. I thought just judging by content it'd be like mid-20th century, 1988.
Yeah.
Jeez.
I love you reading it though, Frankie.
I was gonna say, sorry guys.
That doesn't make it an enjoyable story. Like,
it's cool. Feminist analysis is always a bummer.
Yeah. Yeah, it does make you like wonder what Matilda would be like as a story if it was written by literally any woman who wasn't Roald Dahl. Like, what would be different?
Should we rewrite it? Should we do like a communal Storytime rewrite of Matilda?
Yeah, like Dracula, but better.
I was thinking like Lovecraftian monsters.
So Trunchbull is like...
The parents are Lovecraftian monsters. Everyone's a Lovecraftian monster, but some of them are nice.
Oh, I thought you meant the teacher.
Because then you can describe them as evil without being body shaming. It'll be fine. Tentacles everywhere, but it's okay.
Are you tentacle shaming?
And Matilda's really creepy herself. Like this little like psychic child who's just like haunting everyone. Like,
whoa! Spoilers for the people who haven't read it.
And she's like got the ghost in the chimney already, didn't we?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Haunting.
Yeah, we did have that parrot.
Yeah.
Just seeing the film back in the day and that scene
like-
with the chocolate cake making me feel sick.
What's that, Danny?
Remember seeing the movie back in the day and the scene of like eating all the chocolate cake.
Oh god, yeah, properly sickening.
Wow.
It's like one of the things that I really like about the film, and that I think is quite characteristic of the time that it was made. Just how grotesque it is. Like not just the cake scene, but there's like, you know, that when do you remember? There's the scene where they're in her house. And like the Trunchbull's kind of like chasing, like it's, you know. What's that, John?
Spoilers much?
But no. This was not in the book. This was like was an additional scene that they put in the movie that is not in the book. But like there's all of these like close-ups of Pam Ferris's like real kind of like you know of and the kind of noises that she's making, these really sort of like animalistic grunting noises and things. Like the whole film is really characterized by sort of gleeful grotesquerie.
Holy shit, Frankie, that you just made me realize it absolutely makes sense that Danny DeVito directed this, given what he went on to do with Always Sunny in Philadelphia, right? Dude loves like grotesque, like feral, weird, like.
I really loved the way that you read it, because it felt like it was true to the way that the film did it, and the film was just like so perfect as far as Miss Trunchbull was concerned.
Yeah.
I remember I hated the Wormwoods in the film, but my goodness, they're so much worse in the book.
So bad.
Like Cara said, I loved your voice of that. What was her name? The 10-year-old, the high.
Hortensia.
Yeah. That was amazing.
Oh my
really
god!
I don't really know where that came from.
What was the line that you were cracking up at? Tooting or?
Oh, I can't remember. It's because I could just see like Mike's face in the corner of my screen, and you were just like seeing your like delighted like laughter, in combination with the line itself. I just couldn't. I just started corpsing. I couldn't do it.
Hortensia is the first character that I've noticed is very different in the film as to what she's like in the book.
Yeah, because she was that. She in the film she was that kind of like tall, stringy, blonde girl.
Yeah.
That cool sandy chick.
Yeah.
Lisa, have you put pigtails in? That's very dangerous.
I know, right?
Has your name always been Lisa?